It was a night that no one in Willow Creek, a town that prided itself on safety and familiarity, could have ever imagined. The kind of night where the streets seemed to whisper peace, and the lights in each home offered a comforting glow, a false sense of security that would soon be shattered. Jonathan Miller, a 32-year-old man known in the community for his quiet demeanor and unwavering loyalty to those he cared about, had spent the evening celebrating the completion of a major business deal with his closest friends. Among them, the one person he trusted more than anyone else was Eric Lawson, his childhood companion, someone who had been present through every milestone, every hardship, and every secret shared in laughter or tears. Jonathan's life had always been marked by caution, yet with Eric beside him, he felt invincible. Little did he know that this trust, the kind forged over decades, would become the very instrument of his downfall, setting the stage for a betrayal so shocking it would leave the town reeling for years. As the evening progressed, the group's laughter echoed through Jonathan's home, blending with the soft hum of Willow Creek's quiet streets. Drinks were shared, stories recounted, and memories relived with the ease of people who had grown up together and believed nothing could harm them. Yet beneath the surface of camaraderie, subtle tensions simmered. Eric, outwardly charismatic and smiling, carried a weight that Jonathan could not perceive, a growing resentment, a secret agenda, and a plan that had been meticulously designed, unfolding in stages that only Eric himself fully understood. What began as a celebration was, in truth, the calm before a storm of unimaginable consequence. Jonathan, unaware, spoke freely of his latest ventures, revealing details of financial accounts, the location of his most valuable possessions and personal habits, all of which would later become critical to understanding the betrayal. This juxtaposition of innocence and malice created a tension that, while imperceptible at the moment, would haunt every investigation that followed. Just before midnight, Jonathan excused himself to retrieve a set of documents from his home office. The dim glow of a desk lamp illuminated the meticulous stacks of papers, spreadsheets, and contracts, reflecting a life built on careful planning and trust in relationships he believed were unshakable. Eric, smiling and engaging with the other guests in the living room, watched with an intensity that no one else noticed, a calculated gaze that assessed, evaluated, and planned his next move. The scene was deceptively ordinary, yet hidden beneath the normalcy was a narrative of premeditation. By the time Jonathan returned, the first pieces of the trap had already been set, leaving him unknowingly vulnerable, walking into a sequence of events that would change Willow Creek forever. The very fabric of Jonathan's trust had become the framework for his demise. Investigators later described this as a textbook example of relational betrayal, where familiarity and emotional attachment are weaponized. In Jonathan's case, the familiarity he had cultivated over decades was exploited with surgical precision. Every smile, every reassurance, every gesture of camaraderie from Eric was designed to lull Jonathan into a false sense of safety, to mask the sinister reality that he was, in that very moment, a target. The analysis of this psychological manipulation would become a central point of discussion among behavioral experts, highlighting the dangers of unexamined trust, especially in small communities where personal histories can blind residents to potential threats. As the night deepened, Jonathan's world shifted in ways he could neither anticipate nor comprehend. Eric, seizing a moment when all other guests were distracted, subtly guided Jonathan toward an isolated portion of the house under the pretense of reviewing the newly finalized contracts. In these private moments, away from the laughter and the warmth of friendship, the careful orchestration of betrayal revealed itself. Every word Eric spoke, every question posed, was a part of a strategy meant to control the narrative, to isolate Jonathan, and to ensure that when the moment of violence arrived, there would be no interference, no hesitation, and no witnesses capable of intervening. It was this meticulous planning, masked by the veneer of intimacy and friendship that would later confound police, forensic experts, and behavioral analysts, leaving a trail of questions and a chilling narrative that dominated the town's collective consciousness. By the early hours of the morning, what began as a celebration had become a crime scene in waiting. Jonathan's fate was sealed not by chance or external threat, but by the person he believed he knew better than anyone, a betrayal so intimate, so calculated, that it would echo far beyond the walls of his home and the streets of Willow Creek. As the first signs of the crime unfolded, the quiet town would awaken to a shocking reality. The people you trust the most can become the architects of your destruction. Every subsequent discovery, from the location of Jonathan's belongings to the timeline of his final interactions, revealed layers of premeditation and psychological manipulation that made this case one of the most chilling examples of small-town betrayal in recent memory. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this not only reveal the terrifying potential of human deceit, but also explore the psychological intricacies behind crimes of trust. As the clock edged closer to 1 a.m., the air in Jonathan Miller's home became thick with a tension that only those attuned to human behavior could sense, though none of the other guests suspected the storm that was about to break. The laughter that had once filled the room now felt faintly forced, a fragile veneer over a reality that only one person fully understood. Eric Lawson, the man Jonathan had considered a brother, moved with a quiet precision, every gesture seemingly natural, yet deliberately calculated to avoid arousing suspicion. While Jonathan, completely unaware of the darkness closing in, discussed his upcoming plans for expansion in his business, Eric's mind traced every possible scenario, anticipating outcomes, blocking escape routes in his mental blueprint, and ensuring that no accidental intervention could derail the unfolding plan. It was a chilling reminder of the power of familiarity, the way trust can be twisted into a weapon, and the devastating consequences when the one person you believe would never harm you is the very person orchestrating your downfall. The first unsettling moment arrived subtly, almost imperceptibly, as Jonathan handed Eric a sealed envelope containing sensitive information about his financial accounts. Eric accepted it with the kind of warm, encouraging smile that only decades of friendship could convincingly produce, and Jonathan, completely at ease, returned to the living room to rejoin the others. But inside the office, where shadows clung to corners and the dim light of the desk lamp cast long, distorted shapes across the floor, Eric paused for just a fraction of a second, considering the meticulous steps he would need to take to ensure absolute control over the situation. Forensic investigators would later describe this pause as emblematic of premeditation, the calm before the act, a moment where every element was considered and every contingency planned. That split second of decision-making, invisible to the casual observer, would prove to be the fulcrum upon which the tragedy pivoted. Moments later, the first hint of chaos emerged in the form of a minor argument between two of the guests, trivial in nature, but perfectly timed in its effect. Eric, expertly directing attention away from himself, subtly escalated the dispute while simultaneously coaxing Jonathan toward a secluded hallway under the guise of showing him a potential new investment opportunity. Every movement was choreographed to appear casual, almost incidental, while in reality, it created the isolation that Eric needed to execute the next phase of his plan. Jonathan, trusting and unsuspecting, followed without hesitation, unaware that the steps he took into that hallway would soon lead him into a meticulously constructed trap, a place where years of friendship and loyalty would be weaponized against him with devastating efficiency. In the moments that followed, the narrative of betrayal became impossible to ignore for investigators who later reconstructed the night. Security camera footage revealed subtle gestures, Eric's repeated glances over his shoulder, the precise timing of movements, and the way he interacted with the guests in the living room to maintain a facade of normalcy. Behavioral analysts pointed out that these are hallmarks of someone operating with both premeditation and a deep understanding of human psychology. Eric's ability to manipulate attention, to exploit trust, and to isolate his target without arousing suspicion speaks to a level of planning that goes beyond impulsive crime. It reflects a meticulous study of human behavior and a chilling willingness to exploit it for personal gain. Each step he took, invisible to the casual observer, was deliberate, strategic, and designed to ensure success. By the early hours, Jonathan found himself in a small, dimly lit study room at the far end of the house, a space he had never considered threatening or unsafe. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as Eric closed the door behind him with a quiet click that would later resonate as a symbol of inevitability. The tension was palpable, and though Jonathan could not yet grasp it, his instincts might have whispered caution had he known how to interpret them. Eric's conversation began innocuously, reviewing financial details and discussing shared memories, but gradually, subtle threats and manipulations emerged, statements carefully phrased to instill doubt, control perception, and psychologically weaken Jonathan. This psychological manipulation, while imperceptible to Jonathan at the time, laid the foundation for the ultimate act of betrayal that would follow, highlighting the terrifying reality that manipulation can be more lethal than violence itself. Meanwhile, in the living room, the other guests noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Laughter and casual chatter continued, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and muted music playing softly in the background. But investigators later noted that Eric's careful orchestration extended even to the perception of the other guests. By maintaining a composed demeanor, interacting convincingly, and subtly directing attention away from the hallway, Eric ensured that no interruption would compromise the final stage of his plan. The house, which had once felt like a safe sanctuary, had been transformed into a stage for deception and control, a place where trust itself became the weapon. It was at this point, according to forensic reconstruction, that the critical act of betrayal occurred. Details remain incomplete, intentionally obscured by the perpetrator's careful execution, but it is known that Jonathan was overpowered, coerced, and ultimately placed in a scenario that left him completely vulnerable. Investigators emphasized the precision of the act, the absence of impulsivity, and the strategic use of both environment and psychology. This wasn't a crime of passion or anger. It was a crime of calculated betrayal, executed by someone who understood the deepest vulnerabilities of the person he supposedly loved as a friend. The enormity of the betrayal would reverberate far beyond Jonathan's immediate tragedy, affecting not only the physical evidence left behind, but also the emotional landscape of Willow Creek itself, leaving neighbors and friends questioning every assumption about trust and safety. As dawn approached, the aftermath began to take shape. The first signs of Jonathan's disappearance were subtle. Misplaced personal items, an unanswered phone call, a lingering sense of unease among the guests who had unknowingly witnessed fragments of the betrayal without realizing it. By the time authorities were notified, the house had already become a crime scene in every sense of the word. The psychological impact of such intimate betrayal, the realization that someone you have trusted for decades could orchestrate your undoing, would prove to be almost as devastating as the physical consequences. Experts in criminal behavior noted that this is one of the most insidious aspects of relational betrayal. It destroys not only the life of the victim, but also the foundational sense of trust in a community. Before moving on to more interesting part of the story, remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about what you think of this chilling tale, because stories like this explore not just crime, but the fragile boundaries of trust, friendship, and human psychology. The sun rose over Willow Creek, casting a pale light across streets that had never seemed so quiet, so fragile, as if the town itself were holding its breath in anticipation of the terrible truth that was about to surface. The news of Jonathan Miller's disappearance spread quickly, a ripple of shock that transformed into a tidal wave of fear and suspicion, leaving neighbors questioning not only their own security, but the reliability of relationships they had taken for granted. Detectives arrived at Jonathan's home, meticulously cataloging every detail of the house, the living room, and the hallway where the last interactions between Jonathan and Eric had taken place. Forensic teams worked methodically, photographing, measuring, and collecting evidence, every small item scrutinized for the subtle signs that might indicate what had transpired in those fatal hours. Each layer of investigation revealed the chilling reality. Jonathan had been the victim of not only a violent act, but profound betrayal by someone who knew him intimately, someone who understood his routines, his habits, and his vulnerabilities in a way that no stranger ever could. As the detectives pieced together the timeline, they discovered subtle, yet critical clues. Security footage from the street and nearby homes provided fragmented glimpses of Eric's movements that night, but the angles were carefully chosen, and the sequences brief, evidence of a plan executed with near-perfect precision. Investigators noted that Eric had intentionally directed the other guests' attention away from a hallway where Jonathan was led, creating a window in which the crime could be carried out without witnesses. Behavioral experts consulted on the case emphasized that this level of premeditation, combined with intimate knowledge of the victim, is one of the most dangerous combinations in criminal psychology. The betrayal itself became as significant as the act of violence, highlighting how manipulation, familiarity, and trust can be exploited to devastating effect. The town's perception of safety, once taken for granted, began to erode as the full scale of the crime's intimate planning became apparent. Family and friends of Jonathan were brought in to provide statements, each recounting the night in painstaking detail, yet each description added to the mystery rather than resolving it. Some remember moments that, at the time, seemed trivial. A laugh, a shared anecdote, a brief comment, but when reconstructed within the context of Eric's orchestrated deception, these seemingly ordinary gestures became components of a calculated plan designed to disarm and misdirect. The emotional impact on Jonathan's loved ones was immediate and profound. Grief, anger, and disbelief coexisted in a painful paradox. Community members spoke of how the betrayal struck not just Jonathan but the town itself, creating a sense of vulnerability that was difficult to shake. It became clear that the repercussions of such intimate treachery extend far beyond the immediate victim, affecting families, neighbors, and even institutions tasked with maintaining safety. Forensic analysis revealed even more unsettling details. DNA samples collected from a hallway and surrounding areas showed traces consistent with struggle, but they also revealed a pattern suggesting careful preparation and deliberate concealment. Items in the room had been moved or repositioned in subtle ways, indicating that the perpetrator had manipulated the environment to reduce the chances of discovery or to mislead investigators. Experts in crime scene reconstruction emphasize that this behavior reflects not only premeditation, but also an understanding of investigative processes. Eric Lawson, it appeared, had anticipated the ways law enforcement might examine the scene, and had structured his actions to obscure the truth, leaving investigators to untangle a web of psychological and physical clues with minimal guidance. As detectives delved deeper, they began to uncover fragments of digital evidence, messages, emails, and social media interactions that suggested an increasingly strained dynamic between Jonathan and Eric over the preceding months. While nothing overtly incriminating surfaced initially, the tone and content of these communications revealed subtle tensions, unspoken resentments, and hints of conflict that had been carefully concealed from others. Linguistic analysis indicated that Eric had been employing psychological manipulation long before the night of the crime, a pattern of influence designed to establish control and trust simultaneously. Each message, innocuous in isolation, became terrifying in context, a precursor to the betrayal that would ultimately cost Jonathan his life. Public reaction to the investigation intensified as local media began reporting on the extraordinary nature of the case. Headlines emphasized the shocking element of betrayal by a close friend, while residents grappled with the unsettling possibility that the person they trusted most could harbor such dangerous intent. Community forums, social media discussions, and televised segments speculated about motives, opportunities, and psychological profiles, turning the case into a phenomenon that transcended the town itself. Yet, despite the mounting evidence and the growing public awareness, Eric Lawson remained elusive, carefully avoiding behaviors that could link him definitively to the crime. Investigators, aware of the perpetrator's intelligence and meticulous planning, approached every lead with caution, recognizing that one misstep could allow him to slip further into the shadows. The deeper the investigation went, the more evident it became that this was not a spontaneous act of rage or a crime of passion. Experts repeatedly stressed that what Jonathan had faced was the calculated exploitation of trust, a scenario in which every friendship, every shared confidence, and every moment of intimacy had been weaponized. Even the crime scene itself, reconstructed in forensic detail, spoke to the level of premeditation. The isolation of the victim, the subtle manipulation of environmental cues, and the deliberate timing of interactions all pointed to a strategy designed to maximize control and minimize detection. This level of orchestration, combined with intimate knowledge of the victim, made the case not only tragic but profoundly disturbing in its implications for understanding human behavior and relational violence. By the close of the first week of intensive investigation, the sense of urgency had escalated. Detectives, forensic experts, behavioral psychologists, and community members all recognized that the case represented more than a singular act of violence. It was a study in manipulation, betrayal, and the dark potential that can exist within relationships built on decades of trust. Every revelation, from forensic details to digital communications, served to deepen the sense of horror, while also offering tantalizing clues about the motivations and mindset of the perpetrator. Yet, despite the mounting evidence, the question that haunted investigators and the public alike remained: how could someone so familiar, so trusted, become the architect of another person's destruction? And could justice ever truly be served? Before we continue with the story, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about your thoughts on this chilling betrayal, because understanding the psychological and investigative complexity of cases like this helps illuminate the dangerous intersection of trust, manipulation, and violence. By the second week of the investigation, Willow Creek no longer felt like the quiet, predictable town it had once been. What had begun as shock had transformed into an atmosphere of collective anxiety, where neighbors watched one another with subtle suspicion, and once familiar faces now seemed capable of hiding unimaginable secrets. Law enforcement intensified their efforts, working around the clock to piece together the fragments of evidence that pointed increasingly toward Eric Lawson, the very man who had stood beside Jonathan Miller for most of his life. Each new discovery seemed to confirm what many in the town struggled to accept, that the person who had been trusted most deeply was also the one most capable of inflicting irreversible harm. The emotional weight of this realization pressed heavily on investigators, who understood that solving this case would require not only technical expertise, but also an unflinching confrontation with the darkest aspects of human betrayal. The breakthrough came when digital forensic analysts uncovered a series of deleted files on Eric's laptop, retrieved using advanced recovery software that revealed months of meticulous planning. These files contained financial projections, private notes, and encrypted messages that detailed Eric's growing resentment toward Jonathan, stemming from perceived professional overshadowing and long-standing feelings of inadequacy. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had silently nurtured bitterness for years while presenting himself as a loyal companion. Experts later described this psychological duality as one of the most dangerous patterns in criminal behavior, where outward devotion masks internal hostility, allowing resentment to grow unchecked until it reaches a breaking point. The documents made it painfully clear that Jonathan's success had become, in Eric's mind, both an obsession and a justification for betrayal. Simultaneously, investigators traced irregular financial transactions that had taken place in the weeks leading up to Jonathan's death, revealing that Eric had been quietly siphoning small amounts of money from shared ventures and personal accounts. Though insignificant individually, these transactions formed a pattern of escalating financial desperation and manipulation. Prosecutors later argued that these acts demonstrated motive as clearly as any confession could, showing that Eric had been positioning himself to benefit materially from Jonathan's disappearance. This financial trail, combined with the psychological profile and forensic evidence, transformed what had once been circumstantial suspicion into a compelling narrative of premeditated betrayal. When detectives finally confronted Eric with the mounting evidence, the interaction unfolded with chilling intensity. In the interrogation room, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting, Eric maintained his composed demeanor, initially dismissing the accusations as misunderstandings and coincidences. He spoke calmly, even empathetically, portraying himself as another victim of tragedy who had lost a dear friend. However, as investigators presented recovered files, financial records, and detailed reconstructions of his movements on the night of the crime, cracks began to form in his carefully crafted facade. His voice wavered, his posture shifted, and his once confident explanations grew fragmented and inconsistent. Behavioral experts observing the interrogation later noted that this moment marked the collapse of Eric's psychological defenses, revealing the internal conflict between his desire to maintain control and the overwhelming pressure of irrefutable evidence. The turning point came when detectives revealed audio recovered from a malfunctioning security device in Jonathan's study, which had inadvertently captured fragments of conversation from the night of the betrayal. Though distorted, the recording contained unmistakable elements: Eric's voice, Jonathan's expressions of confusion, and moments of escalating tension that contradicted Eric's version of events. Faced with this final piece of evidence, Eric's resistance dissolved. In a subdued, emotionally fractured confession, he admitted to orchestrating the betrayal, describing how years of jealousy, resentment, and perceived injustice had convinced him that Jonathan's success was stolen at his expense. What he had once justified as reclaiming his dignity had culminated in an irreversible act of violence. The confession sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. Residents gathered in homes, churches, and community centers to process the devastating truth, struggling to reconcile the man they had known with the criminal he had become. Jonathan's family, devastated by the confirmation of betrayal, spoke publicly about the depth of their grief, emphasizing that the most painful aspect was not only the loss of Jonathan's life, but the realization that his trust had been exploited so mercilessly. Their statements underscored the profound emotional consequences of relational violence, reminding the nation that crimes rooted in betrayal often leave wounds that extend far beyond physical harm. During the trial, prosecutors meticulously reconstructed the narrative of deception, premeditation, and psychological manipulation, presenting a comprehensive case that illustrated how Eric had weaponized friendship for personal gain. Expert witnesses testified about behavioral patterns, financial motives, and forensic evidence, painting a picture of calculated betrayal rather than impulsive wrongdoing. Defense attorneys attempted to argue emotional instability and impaired judgment, but the overwhelming consistency of the evidence undermined these claims. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, finding Eric Lawson guilty of first-degree murder and financial exploitation. Sentencing marked the final chapter in the legal proceedings, as Eric received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In his final statement, he expressed regret, though many questioned whether his words reflected genuine remorse or merely the resignation of someone who had lost control of the narrative. For Jonathan's family and the people of Willow Creek, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but it could not restore what had been lost. The emotional scars, the broken sense of trust, and the lingering questions about how such betrayal could occur remained etched into the community's collective memory. In the months that followed, Willow Creek embarked on a slow, painful process of healing. Support groups, community dialogues, and counseling initiatives emerged to help residents rebuild trust and confront the psychological impact of the tragedy. Jonathan's legacy was honored through scholarships and charitable foundations that reflected his commitment to integrity and generosity, ensuring that his life would be remembered not for the way it ended, but for the values he embodied. Experts frequently cited the case in discussions about relational violence, emphasizing the importance of recognizing warning signs and fostering open communication in close relationships. Ultimately, Jonathan Miller's story stands as a haunting reminder of the fragile boundary between trust and vulnerability, and of how unchecked resentment can transform intimacy into a weapon. His life, defined by loyalty and optimism, was taken by the very person he believed would protect him, leaving behind a legacy that continues to educate, caution, and inspire reflection. The tragedy of Willow Creek is not only a story of crime, but a testament to the devastating power of betrayal and the enduring importance of vigilance, empathy, and emotional awareness in every human connection. Before you leave, if this story moved you or made you reflect on the nature of trust and friendship, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments, because your engagement helps bring attention to stories that reveal the hidden dangers behind seemingly ordinary relationships. Your voice matters, and together we can continue exploring the truths that shape our world.